Welcome to the March 2023 version of the Atlanta Radio Club monthly meeting. Thanks for being with us again tonight for another great presentation brought to you by Rob, K4GTR, our very dashingly handsome programs coordinator. Several things this month. We'll go ahead and get some quick announcements on activities coming up. We've got our second Sunday in the park at Brook Run on the 12th, I believe it is. And that'll be, of course, my video goes funky at the same time. That'll be from about noon until dark. I believe the time change won't affect that this month. Anyways, so plan on joining us. That's where we just put out some radios and sit around and get on those radios. It's a good chance for newbies to get out there and get rid of some of the mic fright, ask some questions about radios, antennas, and so forth. You don't have to bring anything. You could if you want. If you've got a new radio or a new antenna, you can bring that with you and we can hook it up for you and help you get it working. So please do join us for that. And then again on March 18th, which is a Saturday morning, we'll do another ARC breakfast at Goldberg's Deli there in Toco Hill Shopping Center. And that's right there off of North Druid Hills. And I believe it's maybe Claremont in that general area. There'll be information on both Facebook and the webpage for that. And of course, April's coming up. So we've got Georgia QSO party, and once again we'll be that's the second weekend, and we'll be doing a Saturday event as we have done in the past couple years, and that'll be at Brook Run also. And Brook Run, of course, is off of North Peachtree Road, just north of the perimeter there in Dunwoody. Stephen, do you have any comments to make about the repeaters real quick?
Yes, I do. We finally got the control cables in and we are ready to get the RC210 on the air. So it's a matter of scheduling time to go up to the bank tower and swapping some cables and setting levels, and we'll be good to go. The controller is already programmed, and the good news is very, very few of the control codes are actually going to change, but there will probably be some new ones. So that is the state of things. We are expecting severe weather tomorrow, so there's a good chance that we're going to be needed on the Skywarn net. I will send out an email as I know more. As of right now, I have not heard anything about activation, so I don't really know, but it's a good bet that we will.
Okay.
And that's it.
All right. Yeah, we're always that's kind of a standby thing. When the weather goes south, you can almost expect to find the 682 machine participating in the Skywarn net out of Peachtree City. So when it's bad weather, do get on and provide info as requested for that, but always be aware that there's a chance that the repeater might be in use during severe weather for something like that. So it's a great asset to the community that they're able to use our repeater or link our repeaters with other repeaters for that purpose. One other thing, we've got, of course, the hamfest coming up in June 3rd at Jim Miller Park. So if you have an interest in helping with that, stuff's really getting hot and heavy as far as plans, putting things in place right now. So if you have an interest in helping with that, we'll be calling for volunteers here shortly. But if you have an interest in being on a committee or something and seeing how the hamfest is put together, hit me at president@atlantaradioclub.org and we'll find a spot for you on one of the committees. It's a lot of fun, and it's neat to see how something like that gets put together. So put that on your calendar with all these other great things. I guess I'll go ahead and turn it on over to our dashingly handsome program manager, Rob, K4GTR, and let him take it away with the program for tonight.
Even as we speak. Yeah, I'm just looking to see, I don't see Mr. K. George on here. He was going to introduce the speaker who he's worked with. He wasn't sure if he can get on, so I'm just go ahead and start. Hopefully he'll get on. So yeah, our speaker tonight is Kevin Scott. K4GTR. And we sent a bio out to everybody. I don't know if they saw it, but briefly, he's a double E. He's got a BS and double E from the University of Florida. So he's a Gator. And that's partially why I guess GTR. And he's got an emphasis on RF communications, which very appropriate. His son's a tech, so he, you know, the GT in his call, maybe. I guess it depends on who he's talking to. Whether the GT is Georgia Tech or not. I'll let Kevin explain that. He's worked at several electronics companies: Motorola, Panasonic, Aris, CommScope. I think they make cable boxes. Spinner, Nevis, which I've heard about, and now ATX Networks, where he's on the RF side. Again, we're talking about RF, we're talking about Wi-Fi. We've got a RF expert on here. He enjoys rad chewing and VHF, UHF DXing on tropospheric propagation, trapo and E-skip, which is all pretty close, just different ways of getting far away. And at Aris, he was the go-to guy for Wi-Fi. Again, this sort of all matches up. Coincidentally, our Wi-Fi expert is talking about Wi-Fi. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Kevin Scott, K4GTR. Over to you, sir.
All right, need to be able to, can I share my screen?
Should be able to.
No, I'm still disabled.
All right, try now.
Now, while you're working on that, let me just give a welcome to people who may be joining us, hams from the Long Island, New York clubs. One of our people, Michelle Moore, was kind enough to tell them about the talk, and she said some were interested, and some of you may be on tonight. I think I saw some 2 calls. So welcome to the net. Well, welcome to the Zoom.
Great.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, I got to get it right.
Can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes,
All right,
wonderful.
we'll get started on it. So this is Wi-Fi for hams, and I mention it Wi-Fi for hams is not necessarily that it's Wi-Fi for amateur radio operators. That can be a different subject depending on, you know, any type of amateur radio style of mesh networks you could set up. But no, this is Wi-Fi technology and tying it into what amateur radio operators understand and kind of correlate between the two. So that's primarily what I'm looking at with this particular one. Now, Wi-Fi, some people may think it stood for basically if you had a hi-fi, but I grew up, I had a hi-fi stereo system, but it has nothing to do with high fidelity on the wireless side. But going into that, this was actually, it was a pun. Well, actually, it was a pun for hi-fi, but it doesn't mean wireless fidelity. Let me clarify that particular one. But it was formalized by the IEEE many years ago, and originally it was set aside strictly for 2.4 gigahertz, which the reason why they picked that particular band, it's from 2405 to 2450, the upper band limit on that particular one, or just below that. A microwave ovens operate at 2450. So it's what is called an ISM band, or industrial, science, and medical. So it's one of those license-free bands, and there's several other ISM bands. In fact, there's one at 13 megahertz that is license-free that I'm sure you've heard of. 22 meters. If you haven't, go check out 22meters.com or do a Google search for 22 meters, and you'll see people that have their whisper transceivers on there and beacons and stuff like that. It's a license-free operation, but the whole idea about 2.4 gig, it's license-free. It's not really that wide of a frequency range, and we'll get into some other stuff a little bit later with regard to some of the other bands that they have opened up. But it all was started a while back. Besides IEEE, it's kind of a fallout from WaveLAN, which was created by NCR and AT&T years ago to link cash registers. So that was kind of like the early adoption. And then the IEEE got together and said, we need to have something. Okay, we have Ethernet, great. But if we want to be able to have complete mobility and be able to walk around and really have some good connectivity at good speeds, we need to have some wireless technology in there. What bands can we use? It's going to be low power because you're not going to need to go that far away. And so a license-free band such as the ISM band was a good choice. Another reason for having, say, at 2.4 gigahertz, you don't have to have a monster antenna. The last thing you need is, say, well, for instance, you have a 2-meter, 19-inch long quarter wave antenna. The last thing you want is to have a laptop that has a big old antenna on it. So you want to be able to have something that's very portable and still, like I said, gets your decent amount of range for what you're trying to do to go ahead and connect your computer to the internet in this particular case. And it really didn't make sense to do anything Wi-Fi until you did have the internet set up with the World Wide Web. Prior to that, there was just no need. I mean, we had packet radio that people were, talking back and forth, bulletin board services and stuff like that. And that was our early version of Wi-Fi and still is around now for packet, but it's not the same function. So with this particular one, they needed something to complement the Ethernet system. Now, as far as standardization, if you see this logo in the middle, Wi-Fi certified, that is really important to have because you could have people putting out devices, oh, I claim to be Wi-Fi, it's compatible. And then you find out it's not. And it doesn't work across all lines. That's so frustrating. If you ever happen to buy a particular device for your computer or for your radio or something else, thinking that it is, plug and play capability, and you have to go through all sorts of headaches to try to get it working, if you can even get it working. That's not what the Wi-Fi certification, that's what it was trying to prevent, to make sure that this was something very user-friendly to the non-technical person that's out there, that they would be able to plug and play. And look how it has exploded because it's very easy to work with. Now the future, and really you have to go back to the history of Wi-Fi. This is kind of an eye chart, but you can download this yourself. In fact, I've got at the very end of this presentation, I'll send it out, Rob, to you. I've got a PDF of this as well.
Oh, thank you.
And
Thank you.
And you'll have some references, and there's this from Rody and Schwartz. They put this together and it's really awesome. How they end up starting off with, here's, Ethernet and some earlier stuff, but then they go through the different, you've heard of Wi-Fi B/G, and then there's Wi-Fi A and Wi-Fi, right now you've got several different things that are out there. Wi-Fi AC, I'm sure you've heard. There's also, well, now they've actually changed it more so where they're doing Wi-Fi 4, Wi-Fi 5, Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, and Wi-Fi 7. This is what this, really talks about. There's also a Wi-Fi that operates at 60 gigahertz. It's Wi-Fi 802.11ag. Where the 802.11 happens to come from, that just happens to be the IEEE specification number. And so they have different versions. So that's where the B and the G and all that, there's a whole lot of other stuff. Okay, what happened to version F? I don't know. But there is a version F out there. It's just probably was never published, but that was that particular standardization document that was put together by the IEEE. And the ones that really took are the Wi-Fi 802.11b, G, A originally, and that was for 5 gigahertz, and all these other different ones that you've seen now. And every single time they've gone and improved and changed, like from Wi-Fi 11 to AC and all the other ones that are, higher and higher numbers and letters. And that's why they decided to change it over instead of all these different letters, just make it numbers. Wi-Fi 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 6E is you've got an increased speed because people want speed. The last thing we want, if you remember, everybody, we hated it when we had to go 55 miles an hour on the interstate. Give me a break. Not that everybody did that, but you wanted to go 70, you wanted to go 80. Oh, I'm on Interstate 85. The speed limit should be 85, right? Yeah, well, doesn't really work that way. But the thing is with Wi-Fi, people want speed. They don't want this slow download. If you remember the old dial-up, wow, I went from a 1200 baud modem to a 2400 or a 3600 baud modem. And wow, I finally got a 50K modem. Sweet. And I felt like I was zooming on that particular one. Of course, as we get more and more data, and years ago I got an Apple phone and it required like monthly updates, and I was doing this over a landline, a dial-up, and they were like 50 meg files. So you know what I did? I had to set it up and go walk away for a while. Needless to say, I dumped iPhone a long time ago. I got tired of them. So Android rules. Anyway, with regard to Wi-Fi, things needed to be faster and more usability. And there's certain ways you can get speed. If you're going back to the dial-up, if you remember those different sounds, and then it would change, the noise would actually change to different sounds. What it was doing, it was interrogating back and forth with your modem back to the head end or the switching office. And it was looking at different speeds. It was, starting at 1200. Okay, yeah, we can do 1200. Can you do 2400? Yep, I can do 2400. And it would go higher and higher until it realized, okay, I'm at the maximum speed that your modem can handle, and that stopped there. And now you're connected and you're running at 36K or 52K or whatever it happens to be. And that's what that does there. So with Wi-Fi as well, we're figuring, okay, how can we squeeze more out of it? As you know, RF spectrum is limited. But, and also with regard to frequency modulation or any type of similar phase modulation and frequency modulation and variants of that, if you try to have two carriers on the same frequency at the same time, what happens to the modulation of those? Any takers? You do it on the repeater all the time. Go ahead. I heard somebody start to talk.
Yeah, it cancels them out.
That's right. It's called the capture effect, which is also why aircraft still uses amplitude modulation, because AM does not cancel the other one out. You'll hear carriers interfering with each other, but FM, if you have a weak signal on FM and a strong signal on FM, the stronger signal will blank out the weak one, which is why you can't have that on an aircraft. Well, with this as well, satellites, for instance, if you remember the old TVRO, you had a 10-foot or a 12-foot dish in your yard because you wanted to pick up HBO or something because you were out in the country and couldn't get cable. So this way you could do it directly by satellite. There's only so many frequencies there as well, but they doubled the frequencies by using a very simple technique called polarization. As we all know, your FM systems are vertically polarized. If you're on sideband and CW, especially on VHF and UHF, you're horizontally polarized. And when you have a direct line of sight between the two different, forget isotropic propagation, HF, where you're going to get skipped, things are going to change around there. But when you got a direct line of sight, like a satellite, they're able to double the channels by reusing the same channels, but with a different polarization. So we have horizontal and vertical, and same thing with those satellite channels. You flip from one channel to the next. It may be on the same frequency, but one's vertically polarized and the other one's horizontally polarized. And because there's such a difference in space, at least 20 dB, if not close to 30 dB of isolation between those two, you basically have doubled the amount of channels without increasing your frequencies. The same thing with Wi-Fi as well. They have gone to different polarizations. You have vertical polarization, you have horizontal polarization, you have orthogonal and reflections and other things like that they actually take advantage of. Some of the newest, if you go to Best Buy or Micro Center and take a look at some of these crazy looking Wi-Fi devices with like 8 antennas sticking out all over them, there's a reason for that. There's spatial diversity and there is polarization diversity as well. Because when you get these smaller or lower frequencies with smaller wavelengths, if you have an antenna that's 6 inches apart from the other antenna, that could be a whole wavelength apart, and therefore you get spatial diversity. So they take advantage of that. So it turns out you take 85, for instance, and back when it was 2 lanes each way, you could only get so much traffic. Now that you have 5 lanes each way, you still get bottlenecks, but theoretically, you can get a heck of a lot more traffic through on that multi-lane highway than you could back when it was a 2-lane road or a 4-lane road, things like that. The more lanes you have, the faster speed. Same thing with Wi-Fi. They're using these different polarizations and different spatial diversities using the same frequency and you're able to get faster speeds because your what they call the AP or app access point, or your box that you buy at Wi-Fi or Best Buy or Micro Center, any of those places, that particular Wi-Fi AP will have a bunch of different streams. Your client device, which is your phone, your computer, some other device that happens to be connected to the Wi-Fi network, whether it's a Nest thermometer, those will have the capability of hitting either one, two, maybe multiple streams, depending on the speed and depending on the technology. So that's how you're able to get speeds through Wi-Fi. It just becomes a multi-lane highway. And that's what they've done when they've gone to some of these faster speeds. Bandwidth is another one. And I'm probably jumping ahead here. So let me go through some of these other things and we'll talk about the bandwidth and on all that as well. So some of the key things, and by the way, if anybody has any question, speak up and I'll stop and answer your question right away. That's not a problem.
So going back to the capacity analogy, so I guess maybe like on the freeways, you have a HOV or an HOT lane. That
Mhm.
would be kind of like a dedicated frequency of sorts.
They don't really have that with Wi-Fi. I mean, it's all set up as a time domain
Right.
system. So
Right,
you
but I'm
don't
just
have
kind
like
of
a pilot
imagining
carrier.
that an HOV would be like a dedicated frequency.
Now they don't really do that. Well, you have certain frequencies, but all the data and traffic is all on that one frequency. It just happens to be a
Right.
particular period of time that it sends
Yeah.
those commands. You have your preamble and other things to make that connection. You've got your data that's
Mhm.
sent, you know, address lines, stuff like that. So there's not like a dedicated carrier, like a pilot carrier, for instance, like with police, with the APCO 25 system or any type of police trunk system, you've got
Mhm.
one particular channel that's set up as a pilot channel that basically tells each handheld unit, each mobile unit, what channel to switch to. Like a cellular carrier for that matter. They also have
Okay.
that in the original time. They had a pilot that you would tune to, not so much of Wi-Fi. There's none of that in there. It's if you're on channel 7 or you're on channel 100 or whatever else, that's what you're on. That answer your question or?
Yeah, definitely made it a lot clearer. Thanks for clarifying.
No problem. Anybody else? All right, we'll move on here. So I already talked about spatial streams. That's one of the methods to go ahead and get extra speed. MCS is something that Wi-Fi engineers and other people that are involved in that, they'll talk about this a lot. It's your modulation and coding scheme is what it stands for. And it basically, the MCS will tell you, as far as the MCS level, there's a table that I've got later on that actually explains, it'll tell you you've got 1 stream, 2 streams, 3 streams. It'll tell you the bandwidth that you're using, whether you're on a 20 megahertz or 40 megahertz, you know, the different type of channel. It tells you all that kind of stuff that'll basically tell you what kind of theoretical speed you'll be able to get, you know, with that particular MCS level. And just like with cellular as well, the further you get away from the tower, if you're sending data, you'll find that you actually have to slow your speed down for a number of reasons. Number one, the loss of physics as far as timing, because you're sending data out and then you're waiting for a response to come back. And so that ACK-NAC is what they call it. You're waiting for that here also with Wi-Fi. And you want to make sure you get a very good, and it's on the next page here, the BER, bit error rate. You want to make sure you get a real good bit error rate on your receive side. And if it turns out you get a lot of errors, what they do is they slow it down. Just like if I'm talking too fast and you can't understand me, Kevin, slow down and I can hear you a bit better. Of course, you slow down, you're not going to get as much speed through, but you'll get the 100% copy. And that's kind of what you want to do. Same thing. Oh, a good example of that is Morse code. I'm pretty rusty at it. I can do 5 words a minute, no problem. But if somebody's running 20 words a minute, I'll get a few of those letters and numbers and some other stuff I'll miss up. And I'll say, you know, hey, please, QRS, slow down. And that way I'll be able to copy a lot better. It's the same thing with Wi-Fi. There's actually different speeds. It actually is looking at your bit error rate. And if you're making too many errors, it slows it down until it gets a good 100% copy until you just flat out lose it. If you're, you know, down below 1 bar, of course, you're going to lose your connection and not going to pick up Wi-Fi anymore. But Wi-Fi does that. It'll actually slow down. So there's different modulation schemes that you see here. One of the most common ones now is the OFDMA, orthogonal frequency division multiple access. That allows you to really get the fast speeds. We'll go into what all these different things mean. Binary phase shift keying, we're used to that with PSK31, very good example. So if anybody does that type of work, you can do that. QAM, that's been used in the cable TV industry for a number of years. And OFDM is also used in television, regular broadcast television, and the newer ones are going to OFDMA in order to, that's another whole presentation that I've done as well for GARS, talking about the next generation of television, ATSC 3.0, and they're using OFDMA to get much, much faster bandwidth, and therefore able to get much higher bandwidth channels. Instead of 1080i like you get now, you can get 8K video over the air. So that's how they're able to do this kind of stuff through the different coding schemes. And the same thing back your dial-up modem, they were doing all sorts of different things to be able to, you still had a 3 kilohertz window for audio, but they were cramming as much data in there as possible by, and you'll see later on the constellation that I'll show you, but just remember the word constellation. That'll explain, hopefully, how they're able to get some extra speed out of this. So access point, I mentioned that earlier. And here's some other different things as far as single input, single output. That's what we do right now if we're on our ham repeaters or walkie-talkies or anything like that. Single input, single output. If you end up broadcasting for multiple, like if you have a bunch of linked repeaters, well, it's going to be your multiple user type of situation as well. I mentioned in the beginning where Wi-Fi is using the ISM bands, industrial, scientific, and medical. So those are all unlicensed frequencies, and they keep the power down to keep them licensed as well. Oh, DFS is something else that you'll hear with a lot of times with regard to 5 gigahertz, that particular band, and even 6 gigahertz to a degree. And basically there's existing radar that are on some of our 5 gigahertz channels. And so your Wi-Fi AP, whatever your Wi-Fi box is doing, some of them will allow use of those extra channels. 5 gigahertz is a big band, but you can't use all of it. I found out that my particular Wi-Fi router only operates on the lower band of 5 gigahertz and the upper band on 5 gigahertz. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle that it won't go on. And that just happens to be because that particular vendor that AT&T is using has set that up initially. Probably AT&T said, we don't want to do that. But those are called DFS channels. If it turns out there's no radar in that area, it listens first. And if it's quiet, then just like with amateur radio, we hopefully listen first before we start transmitting, that it's nice and quiet.
Oh, one thing sorry, Kevin, just
sure.
It made me think about when I first got Wi-Fi. I remember I had to switch out wireless telephones because I think the telephones were on the wireless phones were on 2.4 gigahertz. So
sure.
When you'd crank up your wireless telephone, your Wi-Fi would go out.
It depends on the channel it was on. If there should have been a switch on your phone that would allow you to change channels.
Well, this was an older phone, so I think this was an older phone, so I don't think I had that capability.
Okay. A lot of times they're supposed to scan and listen for a quiet frequency, but I'll show you some other stuff about 2.4 gigahertz. It's a very crowded band. So I've got some screen plots, and Android, there's some free apps out there, and Apple also has some apps. You can monitor Wi-Fi in your area, in your house, and make sure you're not colliding and stuff like that. That's a real handy tool. I found out I was having some problems. My wife was complaining about slow speeds, and it turns out my AP in the basement, the AP up in the attic had somehow gotten on the same frequency. So I had to physically go in to the program of one of them and actually change what frequency it was on. It was auto finding something. I don't know why it picked that, but anyway, I changed it to a different frequency. And there was another issue with another device we had, which is used to watch TV in one room from another cable TV box that's in another room. And it turns out there was some interference there because I had the Wi-Fi channel I had or an 80 megahertz channel set up for Wi-Fi, which collided partially with this other 5.8 gig repeater or transceiver. And turns out once I changed it to a 40 megahertz channel, then they were both happy because they weren't interfering with each other. So different things like that. So throughput speeds, I talked about 2.4, 5 gigahertz, and then you've got 20, 40, 80, and 160 megahertz channels. On 2.4 gig, you've really only got 20 megahertz channels. Even then, that's you've really only got 3 if you really want to play with it. And I'll show you why, because of how they have the channel assignments and how they vastly overlap each other. So that's an interesting little question. That's how we're able to squeeze it, but there's a misnomer on that. And graphically, you'll see this and know exactly what's going on. So these MCS levels, MCS 0 is the slowest, and those are the legacy systems like Wi-Fi 802.11b and G, and typically they operated very slowly, but there's a lot of backward compatibility. With all these devices, they make sure that your newest Wi-Fi router will work with some of your oldest clients and as far as your computer or whatever else. If you have an old 802.11b Wi-Fi card, it needs to still be able to communicate. It's not, wiped out like some of the cell phone technology is wiped out. If you have an analog phone, you're a host. You're not going to be able to do it. If you have a TDMA phone, it won't work. So those are the kind of things that happen with the cellular service. Not so with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, they made sure it's all backward compatible.
Kevin, question?
Yes.
Hey, this is Michelle, and I'm a new ham. And people told me, maybe they're just trolling me, that once I passed my general, which I did, that I could have 100-watt Wi-Fi. And I think I read the same thing. And my first question is that true? And if it is, number 2, how do I find out how to do it?
Okay, the answer is no, it's not true if it's true Wi-Fi.
Mhm.
But you could set up a Wi-Fi network not on the 2.4 gigahertz channels, but there are hams that have run, and later on you'll see in the slide presentation some distance records. We have a ham band that's right below. 2304 is one of the frequencies that they end up using, but there's 2390 to 2400 is an amateur radio band, and you could end up, I'd have to take a look exactly. I remember I did some research on this a while back. You'd have to take a look at it, but there are some modes in this one particular mode here. You can have data modes that allow you to have a certain bandwidth, and you would need a certain amount of bandwidth here, but you could have, a Wi-Fi type of connection on some of these amateur radio frequencies, such as 2.3 gigahertz, but it would not be on the 2.4 gig band, or it wouldn't be on the full 5 gig band. There is a 5.7 gig section that is amateur radio band, although some of it is meant for satellite work. But there are some allocations, I believe, for data as well, that you would be able to set up a Wi-Fi type system. But like I said, the short answer is no, and nor would you want 100-watt Wi-Fi at 2.4 gigahertz. You would be fried, because a microwave oven operates at 2.45 gigahertz, and they're well sealed. And the last thing you want is to be able to have that much power. I'll give you a good example. The company that Michael K. George and I worked at, which is Nivus LLC, and it was at the time over in Smyrna. And we had what are called Zigbee modules. They operate at 2.4 gigahertz. The Internet of Things, you might have heard of that as well. But it's basically, it's a little mini Wi-Fi, but it's only for data, and it's meant to like take machine data and then send it on some little router somewhere, and it collects that data and something similar. But it's not like you would have it hooked up to your computer. It's meant for like instrumentation. I got a machine that got to monitor temperature or pressure or something else, and so you have these little modules set up, and they run, low power and very low battery consumption. Well, these things put up to 23 dBm of power level, and into a gain antenna, I could have about 1 watt effective radiated power coming out of this antenna. I was tuning up the radio, my hand was near the antenna, and I could feel my fingers getting warm. That's just at 1 watt.
Mhm.
It wasn't even 1 watt of RF power. It was 1 watt effective radiated power. So I had some gain on the antenna, but it's amazing just with that. So if you had 100 watts at 2.4 gigahertz, your brain would be cooked.
Okay, no, we don't want to, I don't want to live in a Faraday cage. But you were talking about 80 megahertz for Wi-Fi, 2040, 80, and 160. And I was wondering if it might, be able to sneak it in somewhere down there.
Well, no, that's not the actual carrier frequency. That's the bandwidth.
Bandwidth, okay, got you.
That's a channel. And I'll have charts that'll show all that kind of stuff later on down the road.
Thank you very much. I'll let you go for now.
You're quite welcome. All right. So as far as the frequency allocations for the 2.4 gigahertz band, you're only talking 60 megahertz of bandwidth. Now, compared to the HF bands, yeah, that's a lot of bandwidth. But compared to, say, some of our VHF and UHF bands, not so much. And especially when you got all these different people, and you can see there's a whole lot of stuff in here that's all being used. In fact, they even show amateur as being part of this use. I think it's been reallocated since this somewhat, but we've got, I know, from 2390 to 2400 is amateur. And then they seem to have given us this whole amateur allocation off to see if that's still legit. But this is all the ISM band, so it's kind of a shared thing. And maybe we can transmit there, but it's not an actual amateur radio band, but we may have privileges there. Another one down here on the low end of the band, 2300 to 2305. And there's some other secondary allocations down here, goes up to 2310. So there's some amateur allocations in that section of the band, but this is where all the activity is in between here. In fact, we've got amateur stuff. Looks like from 2390 up to 2450. And of course you have the microwave ovens right here at 2450.
Hey, Kevin, what's the frequency allocation for the geosynchronous Sirius XM satellites?
That's down to like 1.67 gigahertz in that area.
Thanks.
So it's right above our 1.2 gig allocation.
Where's Wi-Fi on the 2.4 gig, in this chart here? Where does that fall?
It's right here. You see where I have this, the green, where's amateur? It's this ISM band 2450 plus or minus 50 megahertz. So it starts at 2400. This is where the one band, and goes up to essentially 2450, the band edge. But you've got different channels. I'll go over what the different channels of the actual frequencies. I have that as a chart as well. The 5 gigahertz band, there's a lot of stuff in here, but a majority of it has actually been allocated to be used for, in fact, you can see here radio location and stuff like that. A lot of that's all radar, but they've essentially reallocated this to be able to use Wi-Fi all up in this section here. And since then, about 2 years ago, it's been a global allocation as well. They've expanded that to like 5.925 all the way up to 7.125. This is now the new, what they call the 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi band. And I'll go over all the structure of how that's all put together. So they've really expanded the frequency range for Wi-Fi because it's kind of crowded. Now, going back to your questions about the different frequencies and channels. So your 2.4 gigahertz channels, you have 20, these are 20 megahertz, or actually they call them 22 if you want to consider 20 plus a little bit of guard band as well. Channel 1, channel 6, and channel 11. If you happen to set any of your stuff in your house to any of those channels and there's nobody around you that's using those channels, you'll be fine. But you take a look here, there's a 40 megahertz channel, which you call channel 3. It blankets over channel 1 and channel 6. So it covers this whole area here. So if you're running a 40 megahertz channel, there's 6 channels that you're covering up. Because they've got them all. If you look in the right-hand side of this chart, channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're not individual channels. They overlap each other. So you could go on 1, 6, and 11, and they will not overlap. You can go on 2, 7, and 12, and they won't overlap. You can go on 3, 8, and 13, and they won't overlap. 14 is not allowed in the US, but it is in Europe. That is a channel that's used in European countries.
So your Wi-Fi router is smart enough. So your Wi-Fi router basically is smart enough to know, okay, okay, I've got a connection on channel 1. And I'm not going to allow anything on like 2, 3, 4 that overlaps it.
Well, no, what's going to happen, your Wi-Fi router, it's going to give you, if it's one of two things, it either automatically selects it because it listens and
Right.
sees if there's interference, or you can go and pull a pull down menu and you're going to set it to channel 1, or you can set it to channel 4. It's only going to operate on channel 4. It's not going to bounce around.
But I was
So
just,
it's gonna-
I was just thinking because the Wi-Fi router basically is like, you don't have to go in and say, okay, yeah, I don't have to go in and say, okay, give me channel 1, give me channel 2. It's all at random.
No, initially when you first set it up, it will listen for a quiet frequency, some of them, not all of them. A lot of times
Okay.
they go for a default channel, but you go in your menu and the setup in the beginning. Once you set that channel, you stay on that channel.
Oh, okay.
And it sends out a little pilot ping like, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here, which is called an SSID.
Right.
And that's what your computer, when you're, setting up your computer to go log on to Wi-Fi, you'll look, oh, here's this router. It's, Kevin Scott K4GTR 1. That's
Right.
my router. And it doesn't care. Your computer doesn't care what channel. It just happens to see
Right.
it scans all those channels and it sees, oh, here's these different APs that are in reception. It'll show you the actual signal strength. And, I have my neighbor's stuff. It shows up, a little weaker
Right.
signal, and it's usually secured, stuff like that. So once you set that up, it's really, nothing really cares what channel it's on. It just sees that SSID and then you link to it.
Right. It's, in other words, because like when I plug in my wireless router with AT&T, it's like I didn't have to go in and manually set anything. It's like as long as the Wi-Fi signal was up and all that, just turn on my devices and it makes the connections and
Right.
basically don't have to, it's like plug and play.
It is. And the newer ones will do that. They'll sit there and listen and make sure that it picks a quiet frequency or a relatively quiet frequency. It doesn't just stomp on somebody else, but it'll pick out which is going to be the frequency that has the least amount of interference. Essentially that.
Kevin, I have a question.
Sure.
Okay, I have Wi-Fi here and I live in a condo building. When I look at available Wi-Fi, I see all my neighbors' Wi-Fi.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I think mine is running slow compared to what I'm paying for. How do I go in and check that? Because mine is plug and play. Just like Steve was saying, you get it, you plug it in, then you get a pop-up screen on your computer and you select Wi-Fi. And that's all I get to see. So how do I go check this?
Well, there's one of the keenest things that you would start in the beginning is FAST, F-A-S-T, Foxtrot Alpha Sierra Tango.com. Type it in on your computer, find out what your speed is. And one of the things, let me mention this, and I think it's later on in this presentation, but I'm going to say it now. You can have the fastest Wi-Fi in the world. What really matters first is what's coming into your house. So if you're paying for 1 gig service, or if you're paying for 10 meg service, that's what you got coming into your house. If you have a Wi-Fi router that says it'll do 6 gigabit per second, great, but you're going to be limited to 1 gig, which is not really bad at all. But if, like before, I had AT&T Ethernet, so their DSL service, which was limited to 25 megabit per second. I could have a Wi-Fi router that's capable of a gig speed. I'm still only going to get 25 megabit per second, period. That's it. Now, if I have 2 different devices that are communicating to each other via Wi-Fi, yeah, you can get some fast speeds doing that. But to answer your question, Ed, first you need to go ahead and at least, I would recommend confirming what your speed is coming into your house, because it can vary as well, especially if you're on a DSL or even some fiber systems or Charter or any of the cable TV companies. You'll have different times a day the speed will be throttled because of too many people on there. You got a lot of bit banging that's going on.
Well, I have Google Fiber, so I don't think it's a bandwidth issue.
Okay. Well, that's the first start. Like I said, I always go back to the beginning and find out where the speed is, slowing down. So if you got Google Fiber and it's, 1 gig speed and you got hook a Ethernet cable to it and you got 1 gig speed consistently, okay, you've confirmed that. Now, as far as your Wi-Fi, some carriers, some Wi-Fi companies, yeah, the router producers, there's both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz into that particular, or it broadcasts on both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. The SSID, however, sometimes they use one SSID. I know Comcast did this a lot where they only had one SSID for both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. You didn't know which one you were connected to. It may be you're running slow because right now you're connected to your 2.4 gig router, which is only capable for the most part of a 20 megahertz channel, which will give you some reasonable speeds, but you're not going to get 1 gig. You get 70 megabit per second on 2.4 gig for a 20 megahertz channel. That's what you're going to get.
So here's what I think the problem is. I have 100 meg, which it was a deal they offered us to get us off of Comcast and on the Google Fiber. And I've had 100 meg for about a year. They're constantly hammering me saying, you need to upgrade to 1 gig. Well, I live by myself. 100 meg is just fine for me. And I think they're slowing it down, hoping that I will upgrade. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense to me. That's why I'm suggesting go hook up to an Ethernet cable. So that way you're taking Wi-Fi out of the equation. Go directly to your router and tell me what the speed is. To fast.com. It'll tell you what your speed is to your router. That's the first thing you start. What is coming into your house? Then Wi-Fi is a different animal altogether.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea. Ethernet.
Hold on 1 second. This looks to me like spam.
I just used fast.com and it's pretty cool just to see, like, I've seen very 17 megabits per second, 20 megabits per second, and also the milliseconds of like the latency input and output.
Yep. Yeah, speedtest.net was another one, but I found fast.com, they were working more consistently. It does a really good job.
I've bookmarked that thing, man.
All right. So do that. And that's, like I said, always look to see what the problem is. Like when you're on, transmitting on HF and you're wondering, man, nobody's hearing me. First thing you do is check your VSWR because it could be, your transmitter power may be fine, but you've got a high VSWR, therefore your transmitter's throttling back because it's trying to protect those finals. Take a look at the health of your system to make sure you got a good connection. And that's the first thing I would start. Second thing is, as far as your speed, then do the fast.net or fast.com. I'm sorry, do fast.com when you're connected on Wi-Fi. Compare the difference between the two. Now, if you're running 100 megabit per second and you're going on like I said, a 2.4 gig channel, it's only 20 megahertz. You're not going to get 100 megabit per second speed. You're going to get at most probably 70 megabit per second, sometimes less, depending on the interference, depending on the MCS level that's being sent out from that particular device, whether you're, got a real good signal. If it's all 5 bars and everything, okay, great. But if it's, a weaker signal, you're going to lose some speed going through that. Going back to the SSID, Comcast, I know that their SSIDs, they were using the same, whether you're on 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. If anything, if you can try to make sure that you are always on a 5 gigahertz channel, you will always have a faster speed because you're going to have less interference from your neighbors because the range is not as good. You can also go, instead of a 20, you can go to a 40. You can go to an 80 megahertz channel. And 80 megahertz will give you a heck of a lot more speed. So I know, I'm on an 80 megahertz channel right here, and I have no problem getting 600 megabit per second. When I was getting 600 on my Ethernet, I could get 600 megabit Wi-Fi, no problem. So you get to a faster bandwidth, a wider channel, you're going to definitely get your speeds up. It's the same thing with amateur radio. Take a look at FT8. You got a whole bunch of little carriers all on a voice channel. But if you ended up doing the same thing, one particular data stream on a wideband channel, I guess take a look at some of the backbones that are used for some of these network systems that are on VHF or especially UHF. You can go to 9600 baud, things like that, instead of being at 1200 baud or PSK 31 baud, really slow speed. So the wider the bandwidth, the more the speed you can get, just like a multiple highway.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
I've got a follow-up, just hopefully a quick follow-up.
Sure.
If you're trying to measure the speed of of your line from the carrier, from coming into the house, if I'm on a, say, 100 megabit Ethernet connected to my router, I'm never going to see a speed faster than 100 because the computer's not going to be able to talk. The speed test won't be able to go that fast, right? I won't be able to receive that fast because it always comes in at the speed of the slowest, right? The slowest thing on your network.
Right, which is your modem. You're paying for 100 megabit service. That's what you're going to get. Sometimes you may get a little faster. Sometimes, a lot of times you may get slower depending on the time of day.
But I'm paying for gigabit service on the, coming in from Comcast. But I don't think I can measure that unless I had gigabit, Ethernet that I was testing from.
Well, your computer, if you have an Ethernet connection on your computer, most computers made in the past 10 years have gigabit Ethernet cards. Now, if you only got a 10 base T or 100 base T, okay, no, that won't. But if most of them capable of doing gigabit speed. I mean, when I was at Eris, we were doing modems that had instead of the yellow, they had the blue, which are a 2.5 gig Ethernet. And then they were about to come out with 10 gigabit Ethernet as well. So, I mean, you should be able to, on most computers in the past, say 5 years, you hook an Ethernet cable up to it, you'll be able to see if you're getting a gigabit speed. You should be able to see that. And then if that's the case where maybe a lot of your devices, can't get that, then why are you paying for that extra speed that you're never using? So you can actually call them up and say, hey, I'd like to get a slower speed, and you'll save yourself 10, 20, 30 bucks a month.
Yeah.
So going back to like the traffic analogy, Kevin.
Mhm.
So like for instance, like say you're on I-85, the speed limit is 65 miles per hour, but traffic may be so heavy where you're maybe only doing about, say, I don't know, 40 miles per hour. Is that kind of a good analogy about your internet speed?
Yeah.
Depends on how much the volume. Yeah.
Yep. Because your neighbors I say neighbors as far as who's sharing that pipeline with you. Those are your neighbors that are on the same highway. Yeah. It will affect the speed.
Cool. Well, it's not cool, but it's cool to know.
Yeah. I mean, they've put stuff in place with the newer designs and everything. There's less and less of that. Like a party line, for instance, a DSL, that was digital subscriber line. And
Yeah,
that
had DSL for years.
Yeah, and DSL was very subject to that speed change, depending on how many people, were on. I could see the speed, go from 35 meg all the way up to 80, 100 meg, and then it dropped down to 17 meg. I would see it vary all over the place, depending on the time of day. So that would happen quite a bit. All right. Let me go back to the one thing I really wanted to harp on is whatever you got coming in your house, that's the maximum speed. And the other piece I want to tie with that as well, you could get this great fancy Wi-Fi router that's got 8 streams and all this other cool stuff. It's a Wi-Fi 6E or a Wi-Fi 7. So it'll go everything from 2.45 and 6 gigahertz all the way up 7.125. But if you got older technology, say you got a laptop, it only is capable of doing maybe 1 stream, possibly 2. And it won't cover 6 gigahertz at all. It does 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. In fact, my wife, it was probably about 3 years ago, I got her a laptop. It only had a 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi card in it. Like, are you kidding me? Because I tried connecting to the Wi-Fi, the 5 gig Wi-Fi, and it just didn't show up. Well, what the heck? Scratching my head. And I looked up the card and found out, yeah, it had a 2.4 gig only card. So I went ahead and got a new card for it that'll handle both 2.4 and 5, and now she's happy. So it's much, much faster. So if you can get on 5 gig, that's definitely the way to go. But your client devices, the device you have, your phones, your computers, and everything else, if you cannot, if you don't see the use, if you can't use the capabilities of that Wi-Fi router, be cautious about what you spend. Okay, I want to, spend $300 for this router. You're not going to get any extra speed out of it because your client devices are your limiting factor. So always consider that too when you're going to buy a new Wi-Fi router. Make sense? Okay. So 2.4 gigahertz, I mentioned it's very, very crowded. not only do you have in light blue here, it's probably hard to see, but those are your Wi-Fi channels. You got Bluetooth has a bunch of little skinny channels. There's like 70 something, I think 77, 79, 1 megahertz channels. And Bluetooth, your little Bluetooth headset, it hops around. It'll transmit on this frequency for a real short period of time. Then it jumps over to this frequency and then this one and this. It's constantly hopping all the time. That just happens to be how Bluetooth works. And occasionally you might get some interference on a particular channel. So guess what? You're going to miss that bit, but it's okay because it has redundancy. So when you go to the next frequency, it's nice and clear and it'll make up for that missing error, that missing bit of information and make it back. Just like Sirius XM, you go under a bridge and a long enough bridge and you'll lose the signal. But you'll also, when you lose the signal for a moment, it comes back. Sometimes it'll skip ahead in the programming because it's been putting stuff in buffer. So that's kind of what happens here.
So the frequency thing is similar to how cellular works.
Well, not exactly. Cellular, if you're on a GSM carrier such as T-Mobile or AT&T, they're on a particular frequency. Now, you'll stay on that frequency until you go from one cell to the next. Then the pilot carrier will say, okay, I'm going to do a handoff, and you're going from cell tower 1 to cell tower 2.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It'll change frequencies. CDMA, on the other hand, if you're with Verizon, they have a CDMA carrier, and that is a code type where it does hop around, but it's a code division multiple access rather than GSM, which is General System Mobile, which is a TDMA type time division multiple access type of modulation scheme. I used to do.
Okay, so Bluetooth is basically nothing like that. It just hops around arbitrarily.
Yep.
As
Yeah, it's not
opposed to
getting
like
its
you're at one
information.
cell and you're going to go to another cell.
Right. It's not getting its information from a pilot carrier that you've got at a cell tower that's telling you, okay, time to change channels. Boom. And used to, when they had analog, we could monitor some of those analog. There's some interesting conversations going on, and all of a sudden, boop, they would be gone because the tower would say, okay, we're going to assign that channel to something else. And all of a sudden you hear another conversation instead.
I did that one time years ago, back in the late 80s. I would mess around with the UHF bands on the TV channels and be able to hear bits and pieces.
Yeah. Yep. Because cellular, and I've got a whole nother thing, a whole nother presentation that went over like the history of cellular and stuff like that. Channel 83, if you remember, there was a channel 83. Nobody ever transmitted on it, but those upper channels from 70 through 83
14
got
to 83 was UHF.
Well, 70 to 83 got reallocated to cellular.
Oh, okay.
That's now the cellular band. And then the 700 megahertz band, which is channels 52 through 69, those got reallocated to AT&T and Verizon. That's your 4G LTE. And now you've got T-Mobile talking about their 600 megahertz, their 5G and all that stuff. Those are channels 38 through 51 that got reallocated to not only them, but Charter bought some of that spectrum and other ones. But the 700 megahertz spectrum is also, and 800 as well, is also used for police, fire, public safety. There's a lot of public safety up there that's allocated to that. All your police, you've seen the little short antennas on their walkie-talkies. That's all 800, 700 and 800 megahertz trunked radio systems. And there's also, if you've seen the commercials for AT&T is providing FirstNet, it's to be able to have, public safety talk to each other. Well, that's the 700 megahertz group of allocation that was set aside for public safety. Those were TV channels. So now your TV channels, the only ones left are 2 through 36. That's it.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask whatever, like with the VHF analog for TV, like channels 2 and up or channels 2 and upward. So they're still available for television.
Yeah, you guys need to schedule me for another one. I've got a whole nother presentation.
Okay, well,
television.
I'll shut up. Thank you.
There's a whole nother presentation about that. So anyway, Zigbee, that's the stuff we did at NIVIS. Those are 5 megahertz channels and they're fixed. And anyway, those are used for low power communication of basically just data. The 5 gigahertz channels, remember I mentioned about weather radar, that's all up in this section here. So primarily you're going to find your Wi-Fi boxes, these green channels here. You're going to have some that are in what they call the Uni 1 band. And that's 36 through 48. And then Uni 3, you'll get other ones up in the upper end. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here that a lot of your Wi-Fi routers will not go to because those are, you know, potential interfering channels. And this gap that you see right here, that happens to be an amateur radio allocation. Yay. So cool stuff there. But the 5 gigahertz channels, what you see here by these different triangles and stuff, trapezoids and stuff, those are the channel bandwidth. So you do have some overlap. So if you have a 20 megahertz channel or a 40 or an 80, it's not a separate channel. What you're doing, you're basically bonding or combining. If I've got an 80 megahertz channel, then I'm consuming all 4 of these other channels down here, 36, 40, 44, and 48. And what you're going to find out here, this 40 megahertz channel, they're going to call that 38 because it's right in between 36 and 40. Same thing here. This will be, this 80 megahertz channel is channel 42. And this one right here, this 160 megahertz channel is going to be channel 50. That's how these things all get numbered and everything. So you can see how this chart really helps you to identify certain channels. Occasionally you will find, especially for some of the Wi-Fi extenders, there's 2 different methods. They'll either store and forward. So you'll transmit, say, on channel 40 or maybe channel 42, one of the wider channels, and they'll rebroadcast it on that same channel. So they'll store the information and then for a very short period of time and then forward that packet, which means that your speed is now cut in half because using the same thing, you're cutting your time in half. Okay, I'm going to receive for half the time. I'm going to transmit for half the time. The ones where you don't lose speed is where they say your main channel, say 36 or 40, you're transmitting there, and then they'll repeat it over here on channel 100. You know, they'll do that kind of stuff if they happen to open that up. I have seen that. My AT&T router will do that on occasion. Of taking a look at it. Oh, hey, look, there's some channels over here. And so it'll end up doing that kind of stuff. I wish I'd just keep it there. I'd have no interference. But you can get some tremendous speeds if you can get 160 megahertz channels. But you'll find that nobody uses them because these DFS channels suck up half of this channel. You have to have the full bandwidth available to use 160 megahertz. So the most you're going to get out of most Wi-Fi routers is an 80 megahertz channel, which is pretty good. You can get many hundreds of megabit, if not a kilobit, I'm sorry, a gigabit speed, depending on the type of system, which we'll talk about the different spatial speeds. So go in a little more detail on some of the modulation schemes and speeds. This is the more legacy stuff, the Wi-Fi 802.11b, A, and G. And those were all, by using different modulations, they went from this CCK, which is basically a very slow speed binary, to a 64 QAM, which I'll explain that in a diagram a little bit later, so you'll be able to see that. And those are some ways to get extra speed out of it. Those are all basically 20 megahertz channels and only one spatial stream. So one channel. Taking a look at FT8 versus PSK31. So you've got this FT8 uses what is called a Gaussian frequency shift keying. And so each of those different characters depends on what the voltage level is. It's almost like amplitude modulation, but they are fixed levels. And that basically gives you your data stream. With PSK, they have this bandwidth here where a 1 would be pretty wide and a 0's, pretty narrow, kind of like Morse code, but that's how you're able to get the different speeds, different characters through that. So going with QAM, here's the constellation that I was talking about. If you look at your identification, basically Morse code is a 1 or a 0. It's either on or it's off. Okay, so on would be I'm up here, off I'm down back at the 0 again. But if I end up putting some what we call orthogonal frequency or quadrature amplitude modulation, where I end up putting some what we call vector modulation, where I now have some directions to this modulation as well, I can then put some binary. If you go back to your Boolean algebra or whatever, if you ever had that back in some of your computer labs, but this will basically turn it into a binary. So then I can have, if I'm in this direction, this is 0, 0. But if I'm in the northwest direction, then my code becomes a 0, 1, and on and on. Now I can end up expanding that to where I have, instead of just 2 digits, I could have 3 digits, 4 digits. So some of these right here, this will have 4 digits. So this will be like, and I can't read that too well, 1011, and then 1001, 1010, and 1000. So you'll see that. And then over here, I'm going to have 0010, 0011, and on. So you have all those different combinations, and those different modulation schemes are being sent out. And that actually will allow you in the same bandwidth to be able to put more characters. Because what I'll do here is I have a little bit of voltage here that sticks this carrier, this symbol, should we say, that's, in this direction. But if I want to put more voltage to it, more amplitude, drive it out further, I can end up taking this modulation and get out here. And the more complex I make it, I can put more and more of these, such that I get here. There's a for going to 256. You can see this one here as a 4 QAM, 16 QAM, 32, all the way up to 256 quadrature amplitude modulation. And then we get into Wi-Fi 5 uses 256. And then, I'm sorry, uses 512. And then Wi-Fi 6 uses 1024. And then you got Wi-Fi 7. Let's see if I got that over here. Jumping around too much on this one. Anyway, Wi-Fi 7 uses 4096 different characters. So that's why you're able to get the same, or get some extra speed in the same bandwidth. But if you take a look here, my target accuracy, and this is called bit error rate. I'm sorry, this is packet error rate. And if you're going to make sure that I'm going to decode this, I'm going to decode this. I'm jumping ahead here. I've got some really good graphics that'll show this a little bit better. So let me forego the QAM constellations right now. I've got some visuals that'll really make a whole lot of sense. So 802.11n, if you happen to have an N device, well, that's where they added 5 gigahertz in here instead of 2.4 megahertz. So you had 2.4 and 5. You could go to a maximum 40 megahertz channel, but here you can have multiple spatial streams. That's where you're able to get some extra speed out of this. Still 64 QAM, but you had now 4x4 basically is 4 transmit, 4 receive. And that's what that's standing for there. So you can go to a wider channel, you can go to multiple streams and get greater speeds if all those streams work. And if sometimes they don't work, so be it. At least you get more streams. And so that's where you go from Wi-Fi 4 to Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6. I figure you guys can look at this. And this shows you all the differences between them as you go in extra speeds. You go to 4x4, 8x8. And some of these have, there's the different QAM levels and maximum data rates. For Wi-Fi 5, you can go maximum data rate of nearly 7 gigabits per second. Wi-Fi 6 will have a maximum data rate of nearly 10 gigabits per second. That's theoretical, but that's also, once again, what's coming in your house. Can you actually transfer that much data? Maybe, maybe not. And this kind of goes over, for those of you who don't want to get glossy-eyed by looking at all these different, what they call PHY, or the physical channel. And that's what this essentially is. Here's your carrier. And like with single sideband or with FM, you've got a certain amount of bandwidth and a certain amount of data in there. But with some of these digital modulations, you need to make sure that your sidebands are, drop off pretty quickly, so you don't interfere with the next person or the next channel, your neighbor channel essentially. And then they have all this different data that ends up fitting all within this window. For Wi-Fi 6, here's what they end up doing. They also cram some other subcarriers in here. So you have QAM carriers that are intermixed with this OFDMA major carrier. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but it allows you to be able to pack, instead of having open spaces with no data, it'll pack all this space to allow you to have more data. And here's the key. This more data is not just you, but you're in an airport. You're not the only one using Wi-Fi. This blue, this could be your phone, Rob, that this is allocated to you. And Steve, you've been allocated this brown section. So you've got that amount of data on that particular carrier. You're all using it at the same time, but they've allocated different portions of it. Ed, you can have this other section down here. Instead of where you're getting blocked out or getting really slow speed, now what they've done is they packed and allocated all these little different channels, subcarriers within that big carrier. And so they're maximizing the use of that particular channel to get more speed. That makes sense to y'all? I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's how you're able to get more speed. They're just utilizing whatever's there and make sure there's no empty
I'll have
spaces.
what you having.
Just like my church, for instance. There will be some empty seats like in the middle somewhere, and they'll say, hey, if you can, we got some new people coming in. Can you all scooch to the middle? Go ahead and, allow some people to, pack them in. So that's essentially what you're doing here. You're having open space and packing them in. Packing in that data.
You're doing like in a
MCS
database world. I was a DBA, so we call it like a defrag or a reorg.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So yeah, it's like defragging, but in this case, you're trying to utilize all that space. As I mentioned earlier about the MCS tables and everything, there's different things that it's looking at as far as the spatial streams. As I mentioned, you got horizontal, vertical, orthogonal, and spatial diversity. And this is all, boy, this is a really small chart to be able to see. But essentially, this first group of rows, that's for one stream. And then if you've got two streams, there's your theoretical speeds. And for three streams, there's your theoretical speeds. Same modulation, because you got BPSK, 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 and QPSK for the second one, all these different modes. So there's some different coding that goes on, but you'll find your theoretical speeds depending on whether you're on a, whether you have some guard bands or what kind of channels that you have. And then as far as all the different things, so you got some, here's 1.7 gigabit per second speed that you can get off some of these channels. That's only the 3 streams. You get 8 streams, you can imagine what's going to end up happening. There's more of a close-up of what you're actually seeing for the different MCS indexes. And here's 3 spatial streams, and it shows all this other coding stuff that goes on. But there's your speeds you're able to get theoretically if it turns out that, you're on MCS 11, you got 3 spatial streams, and you're able to use all 3 of those streams with your client device. Your computer has a card that's very new and then is capable of connecting all 3 of those streams and differentiating between them.
And
there's
again,
an 8
depending on the traffic.
Yeah.
volume.
And there's an 8 stream system. Well, the traffic in this case is you, as far as you connecting. Now, if you're at an airport, once again, you may be using some of those streams and somebody else may use another set of streams. It really depends. It's a little more complicated when it gets to that, but you can get some really good speeds. If it's just you on the system, you're the only one on the highway, you can get some tremendous speeds here. There's almost
kind of like having a Lamborghini. You can just open it up and put the pedal to the metal.
Yes, you can.
So
So
question, just the streams, we're talking the streams are where you're bonding channels, right? You grab 4 streams means you're using 4 channels?
No. 4 streams, I'm using the same channel, but different, whether it's spatial diversity, different antennas that are a wavelength or 2 apart, or different polarizations, those are streams. You don't use more than one channel. You don't bond them essentially. You do when you go from a 20 megahertz to a 40 megahertz to an 80 megahertz. Yeah, you're essentially bonding channels there. That's a different animal altogether. And that allows you to be able to, let me see if it shows it on here. Yeah. See, there's an 80 megahertz channel. There's a 160 megahertz channel.
Okay.
So you can see the kind of speed you get from 1801 to 36. I mean, I double my speed when I go from 80 to 160 megahertz channel. So this is showing you.
How do they change the polarization with one antenna going in whatever direction it's going?
You didn't. If you only at one antenna, then you're only at that one polarization. So you're not going to gain these speeds. So you got to go back to something that there's one stream right there, and you're only going to be able to go, for instance, for 160. Let's see. Those aren't the channel bandwidths, but
That's okay. So the point is, if you look at the newer routers, and I guess on the computer cards too, would have multiple antennas for multiple streams.
yeah, a lot of them do.
Okay.
And even your new phones and stuff like that will have multiple antennas scattered throughout.
Okay.
I know the routers that we put together when I was at Aris, We had some routers that were for Xfinity, and they had 8 antennas inside there. Now that was the router or the AP. That was not necessarily your computer or your phone or anything, but they had the capability of actually doing that if you could utilize that. So propagation on these higher frequencies, 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz. You'll find 2.4 gigahertz will go through the walls a little bit better. 5 gigahertz, not so much. You're going to get shorter range. Now, 5 gigahertz, the FCC has allowed for a higher power up to 1 watt because they need it to be able to get the range, because the range is much poorer. I mean, you're 2 to 3 times the frequency that you were in 2.4 gig. So you're going to definitely be affected by any type of metal walls and stuff like that. It's going to act like a Faraday shield. So that's going to be an issue. At 2.4, there's a lot more interference, but you do have, like I said, a longer range, especially outside. You'll be able to get out a little bit further. Now, there's some amateur distance records, just to show you, Michelle, you were asking about a 100-watt Wi-Fi unit. There's people that have actually, on 2304, that one particular frequency, they've taken, now these are probably single carriers, not necessarily a Wi-Fi router, but I have seen some articles in QST that people have taken a Wi-Fi router and they've modified it to be able to operate, you know, for amateur radio use and stuff like that, and hooked a little dish to it to be able to get much better gain. Got on some mountaintop over in California to another mountaintop in California, and have easily gotten, you know, good Wi-Fi access 100 miles away, you know, but they're on mountaintops and there's very low humidity, because humidity is a big issue at these higher frequencies, especially at 2.3, 2.4 gig. That's why microwave ovens work so well, because they resonate the water molecule. And that's what happens here as well. So you've got that. You've also got that 5 gigahertz. You've got some distance records. Obviously, you see these for tropo. I mean, they're anywhere from 17 to 4,000 kilometers. Here's going from Hawaii over to California. Not so much. You got about 1/3 the distance, but still pretty reasonable with some of these, you know, tropo. Rain scatters a little different, but tropo is what I look at as far as point A to point B.
Well, thank you for that. So you don't, what you do is you modify the router. You don't add anything additional to the router to make this happen?
No, they would have to go in. A lot of routers you can't hack the
Right.
code, but if they started with something, they created their own. I mean, amateur radio operators, a lot of them are pretty clever people, and some of them are already in that business, so they'll probably take that particular hardware and they'll write their own source code to actually drive that thing. Those
Thank you.
Wi-Fi ICs to be able to actually, you know, talk and modulate and change frequencies.
Thank you very much. This looks like a fun thing to play with.
Yeah, it would be. I know there's one gentleman in the Gwinnett Amateur Radio Society. He's based out of Blairsville, and he does a lot of stuff up on those higher frequencies. In fact, he's got a 10 gigahertz feed horn that he's made contacts with other people on 10 gigahertz, get up on a mountaintop, Brasstown Bald, and talk to somebody over in Cleveland, Tennessee. Now, the FCC versus Europeans, they have a little different way of determining how much power is calculated with Wi-Fi. With the FCC, they call it EIRP, effective isotropic radiated power. And basically, it's going to be your antenna gain and your power and your cables and everything all together. So you could end up going with a higher gain antenna. Well, then you're going to have to turn your transmitter power down. And you'll find, here's the thing that I found out just from my own experience, and I've talked to some of our Wi-Fi engineers when I was at Aris, and they were kind of like, oh, didn't really think about that. All of the Aris routers that were used for Comcast and Cox and Charter and stuff like that, they all were internal antennas. And me personally, I like to have my own antenna that I can aim and stuff like that. But I found that when I went ahead and looked at the actual reception, it just really, the routers that I were getting were the ones with the external antennas that had some decent gain. And I thought, wow, these are going to work better. But really, they didn't. Because once again, you're looking at the effective total power radiated by that particular antenna. And if you got an antenna with, high gain, you're going to have a lower power transmitter. And back to my broadcast days, I used to be a broadcast engineer when I was going to college for an AM and FM radio stations. And you'll find that a lot of FM stations that are near cities that really want to get good building penetration, they'll have fewer bays for lower gain, but they'll have massive transmitters. It'll be like 250 kilowatt transmitters pumped and combined together to be able to get a really high antenna input power and very low gain on that antenna because it gets better saturation. It's the same thing with a lot of the routers that don't have external antennas. They're actually running more transmitter power. They consume more energy, but they have a more uniform pattern, and they're actually putting out more effective radiated power than the ones that have the external antennas. The external antennas will give you certain better gain in certain areas, but you're going to have a much less uniform pattern. You're going to have more dead spots and stuff like that coming from those type of routers.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm Dave Christie, WB5KFP down in Fayetteville.
Yes, sir.
I got on this through a link from the Southeast DX Club. Anyway, that doesn't matter. For reasons that I won't bother you to go into, my router is on my third floor, and I have considerable trouble getting a signal downstairs. I used to have one without an external antenna, and it worked pretty good. Went to Best Buy and bought one with, I think, 4 antennas on it, and it seems to work worse downstairs.
Yep.
Is there a solution to orienting those antennas somehow, or should I just find a way to move the thing downstairs?
Well, here's what I do in my house. I've got my router in the basement, and I run an Ethernet cable up to my attic, where then that goes up. I put a hole in the air conditioning duct that goes into my bedroom closet. So that way you don't want to have a router in the attic. It's just not meant to handle those high temperatures in the summertime because you'll kill them. If you have access to that, great. If you don't, then I recommend getting something called a wireless extender or a Wi-Fi extender.
Yes, I have that. Yes.
Okay. And you'll get half the throughput, but you'll end up rebroadcasting your signal, upstairs. Find out wherever you can do that. An extender, it's a compromise. The best thing is if you have an Ethernet cable, then you can have a router upstairs and a router downstairs.
Yeah.
And that's your best bet.
But twisting those antennas around one way or the other,
that can help.
Won't really matter, or just
yeah, it can. Yeah, make sure the antennas are aimed such that you do get coverage. And if you have an app on your phone, the one I have is a Wi-Fi analyzer app. It's an Android app, and it'll actually look at your signal strength and everything else of your different channels. So you can actually monitor that yourself, change the antennas around and see what kind of signle you have.
Do those antennas basically have a pattern like a monopole, or is
They do.
Simple?
They do.
So if I put it horizontal, it would maybe radiate more up and down.
Correct.
Okay. Thanks for taking the time.
You bet. I know we're starting to get kind of late here, but I got a few more slides, and I'll run past here. Just some of the antenna types that you'll find. If you have the opportunity to actually hook up an external antenna, most of the time the FCC doesn't allow you to do that. They don't want you messing with it. So they have non-user changeable antennas, but in some cases they may have antennas you can put on. And this is one that I use right now. This is highly directional, 10 dB gain in one direction. Does a pretty good job. So these are typically the antennas you'll find inside a lot of routers that do not have external antennas. So it's a 0 dB gain antenna, and sometimes a little less than that. But they pump a lot of power to get your decent pattern. You were mentioning about your neighbors. I mean, this is from inside my house. I go outside my house, look at all the different people on 2.4 gigahertz. It's a crowded band. 5 gigahertz, not as bad. And you'll see this analyzer. It's on the low end of the band and the upper end of the band. So that's on the low end of the band. You'll see some different people, myself and neighbors. And the upper end of the band, there's several different people that are operating there, all 80 megahertz channels. There's one 40 megahertz channel right here, or maybe even a 20 megahertz channel. I know these are two 40 megahertz channels. There's one 80 megahertz channel. You can see how they line up. So
Hey, I got something I'm kind of noticing is very interesting. While you were talking, I downloaded one of the Android apps and I went over here and I'm looking at my Wi-Fi analyzer and our Wi-Fi router is apparently using channels 9 through 13 if I'm reading the speed test thing, reading the signal strength thing right, and I'm getting like about a 66 dBm, so 66 decibels.
yep. Well, probably
And-
minus 66. Probably a
Yeah,
minus.
it's minus 66.
Yeah.
How come it's a minus?
Well, it could just receive signal strength. If you hook it up
Got
to a
it.
transmitter, you're always going to get something significantly less. If you're getting
Right.
plus 66, I mean, you're talking about a lot of watts. I mean, 30 dBm is 1 watt.
Oh, okay. So it's probably about a couple of watts then.
No, minus 66 means you're 66 dB below 0 dBm, which is 1 milliwatt. That's receive strength.
Gotcha.
So minus 66 isn't bad. I mean, if you typically you're going to get minus 40 if you're near your router. Walk over to your router, see what kind of signal strength you get, and then walk further away. And eventually it'll drop out.
I'll do
fair
that
noise.
after this thing. But this is a pretty cool tool. So I'm using channels 9 through 13, and hey, you got me curious, brother.
There you go. So I'm going to bump through these pretty quickly as far as things to look for. You can look at this on your own speed. I don't want to hold up everybody too much here, but mesh networks, Wi-Fi extenders, David, these are things that you might want to be checking out, as well. If you don't have real good coverage, there are systems out there that have multiple devices that allow you to be able to extend your range. Like I said, the simplest thing that I did was just run a router connected by Ethernet because I've got conduit in my house. When I had the house built, I ran my own conduit from the basement to the attic because I knew I was going to need it, being a ham radio operator. So that worked out well. So you can optimize Wi-Fi throughout your house, put it in the most central location you can. If you've only got one router, if you're going to have multiple routers, then, have them on opposite sides. Or if you're going to have, an extender somewhere, then put it in an area that's kind of a dead zone or near that dead zone. You want to make sure that thing's going to pick up your main router and then rebroadcast it into that dead zone. So it still has to have a decent enough signal to repeat. So you need to make sure of that one. So Wi-Fi 6E, there's another 1200 megahertz of spectrum, and that was these other channels. We talked about Wi-Fi, the 5 gigahertz channels. Look at all the channel bandwidth you're getting with 6 gigahertz channels. Not only that, they're going to have what are called 320 megabit or megahertz wide channels in this whole section here. So these are 160 megahertz. You can actually use these to get some really good speed. And then there's the 82.11 BE, which is Wi-Fi 7. You're going from 1024 to 496. Here's the key thing that I wanted to show you, which is so cool. I got this from Rodian Schwartz. Error vector magnitude. That's what I was trying to mention earlier. This is something that's really important. This is kind of like target practice. Those of you who shot a 22, I know at Boy Scout camp, you had to shoot 5 rounds within the circle that's the size of a quarter to pass your rifle merit badge from 50 feet away. When I was an adult, my son was at scout camp, just bragging a little bit. I hadn't shot in probably a good number of years. In my second round, I got 5 under a quarter. My third round, I got 5 rounds under the shape of a dime. So that's essentially what you're doing here is you got to hit this target, because if it turns out if I've got too much noise in the system, this center point here might not be at the center. It might drift off to the side. And therefore, when I demodulate this, I may, instead of being at this location, the demodulator will think I'm at this location and therefore give me an error. And then as you go to higher and higher speeds, that real estate gets smaller and smaller, and it gets more critical that you are accurate. Look at this. You've got to have an EVM of less than 1.26%. Originally like 3.16%, buffer. Now you're only 1.26% accuracy. You got to be in that target. That's pretty stinking tight. But you get some more speed. I mean, that's the whole idea about getting more speed, but you have to be more accurate. Your circuits have to be more accurate. Your frequency accuracy has to be even tighter. You know, there's more chances for error, and you can't do that if you want to be able to get those faster speeds. So there's your 320 megahertz channels. Now, once again, they're overlapping them again to kind of cheat. But you have basically three 320 megahertz channels that you'll be able to use within the 6 gigahertz band if you have a client device that has that kind of bandwidth, and you'll be able to get just a tremendous amount of speed. Now, Europe, they're only giving them, the people over there, only 500 megahertz of bandwidth. North America, Canada, Mexico, we're 1200 megahertz. We go all the way up to 7.125. So yay, USA. So there's still going to be more demand for higher data rates and things like that. This is a pretty cool chart. I'll let you take a look at that for all the different streams. This kind of gives good graphics of how things end up working, the channel bandwidth, how you're able to get extra speed there, your symbols, you know, what kind of symbol design you have. There's 16 spatial streams that they've got proposed for some of the new Wi-Fi. So it's just amazing what they're doing to get this all going. Power tables as well. There's some of them, Michelle, you'd be interested in with regards to, you know, how much power you can actually run. And there's some that are considered to be for indoor only. So they run lower power. And then there's very low power to really conserve energy and stuff like that. So as long as you're making good contact, you drop the power down even further. So a lot of smarts that are going into these new Wi-Fi 7 stuff. So there's all my reference tables, and you'll have that, Rob, I'll send that to you.
Whoa.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. I'll publish that, you know, put that on the net and then send everybody, put it on Facebook on our page.
Thanks a whole bunch, Kevin. It's great.
I hope I didn't have you drinking from a fire hose, but
Hey, Kevin, that was very good. Thank you very much.
no
So
problem.
what
Thank
if
you.
you did, man? It was great.
You got time for one more question?
Oh yeah, I got time. I can hang out.
All right. I was looking at the App Store, and there are literally dozens of Wi-Fi analyzers out here. And I was wondering if there's one or two that you recommended.
Well, the one that I use is called, let me see. I mean, you should be able to see my screen, right? I mean, you can see me.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to hold up my Wi-Fi analyzer app. Let's see if it's.
Lost you.
Can you see me okay? It looks like a VU meter.
There we go. Yes.
Says Wi-Fi analyzer. It looks like a VU meter in there.
Okay.
So we'll see if that's available for iPhone.
There's going to be other ones available for iPhone. The one who told me about this kind of stuff, I used to work with her at Aris, and she was a software engineer, didn't really understand hardware as much, but she really knew her software. And, you know, you put two brains together, you know, me from the hardware side, her from the more the software side, and it was a great combination. We really, you know, fed off each other and everything. And she taught me about that because she would go to her friend's house for a party or something like that, and she would analyze their Wi-Fi system. Hey, you know, you got some interference. You're broadcasting, you know, on your neighbor's channel. You know, I can get you faster speeds. Let's go ahead and she would doctor up their Wi-Fi server or their router right then and there, and they'd leave with a faster Wi-Fi system when they left. So I learned that from her, and it's kind of like cool. So.
She must
I
get
can share
lots
the
of party invitations.
What's that?
She gets lots of party invitations.
Yep.
Hey, get your nerd on, baby.
Darn right.
Free analysis. Somebody was talking earlier, a friend was asking me about, so there's a protocol that Wi-Fi has had from day one where you would get, I guess if you have unauthorized people on your, on the Wi-Fi, you can kick them off. I don't know how you say who is
Here's
who
an
is-
easy way to do that is just set up a security, whether it's WEP or there's all sorts of different protocols that you can put on there.
Yeah.
So they have to have a password to get in. I
Yeah,
know
I'm
I
using
used to get in
back filtering.
before I had high-speed internet, my neighbor up the street, they had a Wi-Fi system set up, and it was open. They didn't have a password on it. I could actually log into it from my second story bedroom window.
I'm guilty of doing that.
Yep.
I'm guilty of doing that with a next door neighbor of my mother-in-law's in Florida several years ago.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's like the AT&T router that I've had, when I switched over to AT&T, it's like it's password protected right out of the box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Tom?
most of them are nowadays.
Rob,
What?
just hackers do this all the time. Just search deauthorization. That shows you how to kick off people off your Wi-Fi, whether they should be there or not. So you'll
Okay.
have some fun with that.
I'll look that up because what I'm doing, I've got MAC address filtering on, which I think protects me from people. I understand that if you're snooping or if you're sniffing, you could put a fake find out what the MAC addresses are and put in a fake MAC address. But
I'd just rather just do security and just have it where they have to have a password. They can't get in.
Yeah.
Google the term
It's the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid.
That's right.
I'll definitely look for that. Thanks. Anyone else? I know people have questions. Where's Bob? Bob's got to have a question. Always count on Bob for a question.
Oh, he's muted.
Yeah, I hope he's trying to say something. Yeah, you're muted, Bob, if you're talking.
All right, yeah, okay.
There he is.
When they sell those routers with the Wi-Fi connection, and it has like the 2 or 4 or 6 or however many antennas it has, that's just all hype, or do those different antennas, do they really help out anything?
Me personally, based on my experience, I'd say it's more hype.
Okay.
Because I used to be into that. I mean, thinking about, from an amateur radio perspective, I like to have an antenna with some gain. And you should theoretically be able to do that. But I found that what they end up doing, because the FCC says you're going to be you have a maximum EIRP. So you have an effective radio power. You can't go any more than this kind of power level. So if you add the power amplifier within the Wi-Fi router, plus the antenna gain minus the cable loss, okay, I'm at 1 watt ERP, or in 2.4 gigahertz would be 4 watts ERP. So if I've got an antenna that's got 5 dB of gain, let's say 6 dB gain, keep the math, much more easy. That's 4 times the amount of, if I put 1 watt in, I got 4 watts out. So I got 1 watt in, but I'd be better off if I had a 4 watt transmitter going to a 0 dB gain antenna. Then I have more saturation. Now I'm generating more heat, more energy, but I don't really care about that. I'm plugged into the wall. I'm not running off a battery. I know the Europeans, they have certain limits as far as what they want for power consumption and stuff like that. But heck, I want good penetration such that I don't have dead spots. A good example, and not so much nowadays as it was back when I lived in Florida, there's an FM station that has 12 bays. That's the cheap route of getting 100,000 watts effective radiated power. And then you have an FM station that's got 4 bays. You take a look at some of the Atlanta stations or whatever, they've got, 4, maybe 6 bays. I know I've been on the Richland Tower that's in Midtown off Claremont. Yeah. Been on that tower, and there's a bunch of FM stations that combine there. If you have a 4-bay antenna system versus a 12-bay, that means you're putting a lot more power into that 4-bay antenna to still achieve 100,000 watts. You've got a lot more saturation. There's a lot more energy that's going out, up, down, everywhere else. Whereas when you take a 12-bay antenna, you're taking that energy and squeezing it into a narrower beam, and you're hitting the horizon fine, but you're going to be a lot more spotty. The same thing with the translators. There's a lot of translators in Atlanta that they're running 250 watts, and some of them are up 1,000 feet. 680 The Fan has a translator on 93.7, and they're broadcasting also from the Claremont towers, and there's several of them that are down that way. You'll find as you're traveling along, you may pick them up, but there's a lot more picket fencing, a lot, dropping out in and out of those stations because there's not much saturation. They're only taking 250 watts and spreading it out over a very large 30-mile radius area. That's a lot. Whereas I take 100,000 watts and spread it out, I got a lot better saturation. And if I have higher transmitter, lower antenna gain, where it's really, instead of squeezing it down, it's now, much broader, and it has what they call down tilt, where they aim a lot of it more at the ground, then you're going to get much better saturation and much better signal. Same thing goes with Wi-Fi. You walk through your house, you don't want dead spots. You want to have really good saturation throughout your house. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Let me, that's the distance, from the distance perspective, right? But if you've got more antennas, then you can go to multiple streams, and that's where you pick up speed, right? If
Well, they
you're-
do have they actually have multiple antennas inside the routers. For instance, the Xfinity, they've got the different routers, oh gosh, now I'm trying to remember the name of it. XB7, XB6 was the first one that came at XB7, and now they have XB8. It's a tower that you'll see advertised on TV. That's got like 8 antennas for 5 gigahertz and 4 antennas for 2.4 gigahertz. It's got all sorts of antennas in there. I got pictures I can show you of what some of these things look like inside. There's a whole constellation of antennas, and they're at different orientations around the unit, on the side of the unit, on the top of the unit, and they're able to get that spatial orientation. But they're all internal antennas with basically 0 dB of gain. So they're pumping a lot of antenna power into them and no gain. Those are internals. And so you get better saturation. That's the way I have to look at it, saturation versus, the external antennas. You won't get the saturation. You may get some gain, but you're still limited. It's still looking at 1 watt effective radiated power from that antenna, whether it's off a gain antenna or a little antenna. 1 watt is 1 watt. But if I take that 1 watt and I have it going in many different directions, I've got a lot more saturation. So the internal antennas, I found them actually in practice to be a better router for coverage.
Good to know. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, Rob, I done my job.
There you go.
Yes, you have. Thank you, Bob. Yeah.
I like the Apollo 8 picture you have in the background.
Oh, thank you. That's one of my favorite photos to have around. I got it on some of the other computers.
So
too.
you planning on seeing the eclipse next year?
If it flies over Kennesaw, yeah.
No, you have to go out to Memphis and that whole area. That's the next big one. That's the full total eclipse.
Well, I mean, if I see a partial, I'm happy.
I'll be in Missouri for that one.
Yeah, I'll be up that way too.
When is this total eclipse in Memphis occurring?
Well, it's going to start like in Texas and go all the way up. The closest to Atlanta is probably like Memphis, Missouri, that area. But it's going to be in April of next year.
I think it's the 11th, April 11th.
Yes, there is one in October as well, which would be a good warm-up exercise.
Yep.
And NASA wants people to bring their equipment out, and there are specific scientific things that they want, information they want you to gather.
Yep.
So I will shoot the information to John and to Rob, and perhaps they can distribute that and you can take a look at it. ARRL has not come out with any recommendations yet, but it's the smaller one is in October. That is on a Saturday, and then the April one is on a Monday.
Oh, cool. Yeah, send that to me.
Okay, will do.
Yeah, the October is not a total, but it's an annular, which will still be pretty cool.
But for those of us who've never done this before, it's a good warm up, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah. I went up to Hartwell Lake for the last one. That was the most incredible experience. And yeah, there's a lot of amateur radio stuff going on with that too. There's a Science Foundation. I've got an email as well from GARS that talked about it. One of our presenters that we had a year ago who does a lot of scientific experiments and stuff like that with regard to amateur radio. He gave a presentation of all these science experiments that he's doing.
So you said Memphis for the total eclipse next year.
That's one of the cities. There's a map. If you just type in 2024 total eclipse, it'll give you a map. It'll give just Google it.
Right. I think
I was going to say, go to Memphis to see the eclipse and Elvis.
I think it goes up through Rochester as well.
Yeah, it goes, like I said, it starts somewhere in south in Mexico and then keeps going all up into Canada. Big
But-
diagonal line. Just like I
This
said,
is-
I'm only talking about Memphis because geographically, that's probably one of the closer spots from Atlanta to drive to.
The exciting thing about it this year is NASA is specifically inviting and requesting hams to participate.
That's neat. It's unusual, but it's cool.
Any other Wi-Fi related questions?
Anyone?
Did Michael K. George ever join us?
I do not see him on here. I don't, because he wanted to do it, but his wife had other plans.
Ah, okay.
So he wasn't
I
sure if he was
understand
going to be
that.
able to get by that.
All right.
But
Well, Kevin, thanks again, buddy. That was a
Thank you.
great presentation.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Kevin.
Thank you, man. That's very good. I enjoyed
Super
it.
presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll send the slides out to everybody and I'll send the slides to you, Michelle. You can send them to the if you want to send them to the New York clubs.
I can do that, and I'll be happy, and also to the Ham University folks too.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we're going to be your agent for further talks, Kevin. We've got some things lined up for you.
Sounds
I live
good.
in, I live in Atlanta, but I grew up in New York, so I'm up here on family estate issues.
Gotcha.
So she's extending our PR to the New York clubs.
There you go. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
You bet.
John, are you around? John still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yep. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. One last little note for the weekend. I think tomorrow night is the start of the ARRL International DX contest. So if you're into contesting, tomorrow night, I believe, I think it's 7 o'clock our time, but it's a phone event. So get on there and make some contacts and have some fun. Anybody else, any other questions about anything coming up or any suggestions or things they'd like to see the club doing?
Yeah, can I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Again, I'm Dave Christie down in Fayetteville, WB5KFB. I'm one of the net control operators for the WX4 PTC Weather Service Net. And I appreciate the comments you made about linking in and the weather tomorrow, and very much appreciate how much you guys and all the other repeater owners around the state support that effort. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. That's what we're here for. So we look forward to those opportunities to make a difference. And that's one of the ways we do it. The club enjoys doing whatever we can to assist in that. So thank you for the comment. Thank you.
You bet. I hope we don't have an opportunity tomorrow.
Exactly.
Agree with that. Lunch tomorrow, Mellow Mushroom and Buckhead at 12:30.
Oh, that's right. That was the other thing I was going to mention. Lunch tomorrow. So as always, on every Friday, we're at the Mellow Mushroom in Brookhaven, right there off of right across the street from.
Parking lot there is a mess due to construction, but there are spots.
Yeah, they're building the first ever or one of the first ever no drive-through Chick-fil-A. So I think they're getting pretty close to opening. So it should get very interesting in a parking lot that's already struggling to find places for people to park. But we haven't had too big of a problem though. So
Is that John?
yeah.
Hey, this is Michelle. I don't know why, but Chick-fil-A is just going wild in New York, and they're very, very popular up here.
Well, if they haven't had them there before, it's sort of like when we were out in LA years ago when Krispy Kreme showed up to town. So it was
It was a big
like,
deal.
it was like Kiss being in concert or something. So
That's neat. Well, one fast question about Skywarn. Are there any programs for children or for the families of people who are involved with Skywarn that kind of explain things and maybe little exercises they can perform. Up here, like for instance, you can go to the weather station out in the middle of Long Island and have a tour, and also learn to be an official snow measurer. So you can know exactly what the official way of measuring snow is, and or set up your own little home weather station. Does Skywarn work with activities like that at all that you know of?
I don't know of anything personally.
I didn't think so. I hadn't seen it. That's why.
We had a tour. The ARC arranged a tour of the National Weather Service down in Peachtree City.
Mhm.
We went down there for that, and there are Skywarn classes
Right,
held
I've seen
from
those.
time to time around town, but there may be in the winter, or I think it's like during one season for some reason.
I apologize for using the Adobe photograph. I fell and really cut open my lip and my nose. So I'm kind of bleeding and I have these big ugly scabs. So I thought the photograph would be better than trying to, because I've been bleeding off and on through this.
Oh,
It's okay.
well,
I'm
we pray
tough.
for a speedy recovery.
You know, ham radio people are tough. We don't complain.
That's right.
Michelle, where are you in New York?
I'm on the North Shore of Long Island. I'm in Westbury, which is in Nassau County. And I grew up in Huntington and Lloyd Harbor, that area, which is in Suffolk County. And I'm a member of both Limark, the Long Island Mobile Amateur Club. I believe that's what they stand for. And also NARC, which is the Nassau Amateur Radio Club. And actually we meet right here in Eisenhower Park, which is in Westbury. And so I have to say, I really, really enjoy ARC because of the way y'all deal with everything, and it's very friendly and it's very welcoming. And I was so tickled by the grandfather who drove his grandson to the meetings, and how he bought the grandson a better and newer radio. And then he just recently passed his technical exam as a grandfather. And I just think that is so wonderful and cool. That just cheers me no end.
Yeah, that's a future ARC president. Down the road.
So I guess ARC is
right
kind
now.
of like a cheers club. Everybody knows your name and glad you came.
It's wonderful. It really is. He's extraordinarily articulate and poised and handles the radio communication very, very well.
Yeah,
Right.
he's,
Sounds like my little brother Chris when he got into amateur radio when he was about 12, 13 years old.
Is he
he's
still in it?
working on being a net op, so you may hear him on the net soon.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing. That'll be our youngest net op ever if JD becomes a net op. So look forward to that.
Well, good seeing you all. Have a
All right,
beautiful
guys.
evening. Thanks so very much for a super meeting.
Thanks for being on here, Michelle. And thanks for your questions. The questions always help make things better.
I think he really enjoyed talking to us.
I think so. I hope so. So. He'll he'll send the notes. I'll send him a thank you, note, of course. And well, good. I'm glad now. I like having good presentations, but when I have a good one, all of a sudden the pressure's on to do it again.
Yeah.
So find somebody.
Well, I think it was a fantastic presentation. I got on here tonight because when it said Wi-Fi, it's like you piqued my interest as a retired IT guy.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more going on in Wi-Fi than I ever imagined. So it's good to know. Only Tom probably knows all that already because it's radio, but for us, cool. Well, Tom, you're in Florida, right? So you said you're not going to be there tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm at exit 82 on 75 as we speak, and I'll be in Florida tomorrow.
You're southbound and
heading
down.
to Cedar Key. In Florida, I had set up a neighborhood Wi-Fi, and I was putting out 2.5 watts into gain antennas. So some of the antennas had 6
dB, a real 6 dB a gain over isotropic. So I could easily hit half a mile away.
Explain that to, I didn't want to ask the question because, especially the next trip, I'm supposed to know all this. But I thought gain, there was no gain. The antennas do not, I guess, unless they're directional, right? They don't take the power coming in and just add more power like an amplifier. It's just the difference in loss, like compared to the isotropic.
Yeah. If you have an antenna that's directional, then you're concentrating that power in that direction. So you get gain over an isotropic. An isotropic is, think of a dot in the middle of a circle, radiating in all directions.
Yeah. So the average
and-
density is going to be, less because it's going in all directions.
So where I lived, I was in the corner of the neighborhood. So I was able to direct, and then each of the routers were repeaters. So any router that picked up the signal repeated it. And they didn't have directional antennas. So it
Was that a
worked
mesh?
out well.
Was that a mesh then that way?
It was a kind of a semi-mesh network.
Yeah, somebody asked more about that, whether that was going to come up tonight, and so we'll find out.
Yeah. I had picked up the routers I was using, used Linux or Linux or whatever it's called. And so it was modified. So that's what I used within the routers. That
Yeah.
was a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago. So
Yeah.
I had satellite, and then from the satellite, I broadcast it out.
Yep, and you used there was special software for the router.
Yeah.
I tried to put special software on one of my routers and bricked it. So
Well, that can happen.
it's just sitting there. It was cheap enough. So okay, I'll just buy another one.
Yeah, I've forgotten what model it was. I mean, it was a long time ago, but I ended up taking all the routers when we got done. And the routers that failed, they'd last maybe 2 years or so. And at the end, they all went into recycling.
Neat.
So,
So
all right, guys. Enjoy tomorrow. I'll miss you. We'll catch you in another week.
thanks for getting on. See you next week, Tom.
Take it
Bye-bye.
easy, Tom. Safe travels, buddy.
Take it easy,
Thanks,
Tom.
guy.